with respect to innovation. Matt has talked, and others have talked about the need for funding for innovation. Matt, if you could, are there programs here that could benefit small business when we talk about innovation and funding for innovation?
Well, I think it goes back to, again, the early days of CI and the Connecticut Product Development Corporation, which we've gotten away from for a variety of reasons. We do have some programs to help manufacturers be leaner and to do consulting and to sort of think about how to reduce costs. I guess my question to you guys is, do we spend enough to make sure that companies that want to create new products or want to get into new lines and have a workforce and have a paid-off plant and have a 3-generation tradition are able to grow here? It seems to me that we help people stay in business by reducing their costs, but we don't always help the way other states do in helping people go into new lines of business, to be here for another generation of product, or to get into new lines where their expertise would be. It seems to me that our productivity is so high that we keep the output, but we lose the jobs, and eventually the businesses just sort of wither away, even though they have the same output, but with 3 employees instead of 300.
I think that one of the changes that CONNSTEP has made in the last year or so is to focus much more on the market development side of what needs to be done, and I think that is a critical element, absolutely. And it does take time to, move the ship of how people think in that. I wouldn't say that isn't true, but certainly the fact that innovation has to include markets and products as well as just leaning out. Somebody said you can't eliminate people and space forever and still have a company. Right. Absolutely, as you point out, Matt. So I think that there's been movement in that direction, but not nearly enough. And I'll come back to the fact that as CONNSTEP's money is cut out, why there's less time for that.
It's interesting because we had a tradition. We used to have automobile manufacturers in Bristol. We used to compete internationally for things other than just very rarefied aerospace products and whatever. Now we don't even think about that. We now assume, oh, it's going to go to Alabama, it's going to go to South Carolina. When you get right down to it, with a couple of areas that we're not that competitive, the truth is that we probably could compete if we had a little bit more assistance for some of these new global products. We're not more expensive than Germany, we're not more expensive than Japan, so when these manufacturers look worldwide, we look a lot like they do, but we never compete, and we never have packages together to internationally sort of compete for those things anymore.
If I can pick up on your comment about Germany, because I'm thinking Germany remains extraordinarily competitive manufacturing largely with small businesses. It's called the Mittelstand, and they adapted the American agricultural extension service kind of concept to the industrial structure, which is not unlike Pennsylvania's Franklin Grant program. And I really have, I want to come back to one question, but one of the things that there was a conference on the Knowledge Corridor a few months ago. And what was really striking about the reports that were given by the provosts of the 2 universities, even though there was a lot of exciting things done, the culture was not one in which the universities are responsive to, it's not demand driven. It is driven by the internal dynamic of academic competition. And what is so strikingly different, for instance, about the Penn State situation is that's demand driven. And that's part of changing the structure, and I think it's why CONNSTEP is so important. And that's something that, in fact, as a culture ought to be more broadly shared. The one thing, you had some very interesting examples from the tech high schools, and that naturally leads to 2 questions. One of them is, what's happening with our tech schools? I don't know, but I have heard a couple of people say we've been cutting back on the funding, we've been weakening our tech schools, and we've been contracting the pipeline, and that's one of these long-term dynamics that businesses look at, say Connecticut has no commitment to preserving this. But what is absent entirely from this is community colleges. I know a very important high-tech down in the Wallingford area where we have so many metal finishing, especially steel, especially metal companies. They have facilities in another state, and they always expand in the other state because there the community college will always deliver the skill sets that they need, and they say we can never get it in Connecticut. And so I'm wondering about sort of, you've got the entry-level stuff, but what is the role, or what is the fate of the tech schools in Connecticut, and what ought to be the role of the community colleges in terms of sustaining and expanding our precision manufacturing?
I'll start, and then Jerry will follow. I think there's a couple things. One is that we do tie in closely the tech schools in our region with Gateway, for example. So a student that graduates from Platt Tech, gets into the manufacturing world, could then go on to Gateway, pursue their first 2 years of education, a higher education, and then with partnering with somebody like University of New Haven, if they're interested in engineering, they can then take that track. I think one of the challenges is just simple communication, getting the message out there and getting folks to understand, because we work closely with folks at Gateway. They provide these programs. I mean, semester after semester, they keep reaching out to the business community saying we can provide a lot of these different things to meet those needs. So it is somewhat concerning to hear that story, because Gateway continues to push and saying we will meet the needs of the local manufacturers, and that's our role. So I don't want to say it's not just a funding issue. I think it's just a simple communication issue.